Welcome to the Streets and People podcast presented by Get Around Cabo Car Free. Get Around Cabo Car Free is a volunteer community movement advocating for more transport options for people who can't drive in Caboolture and Morayfield in Queensland. In today's podcast, we'll be covering one of these three broad topics. It might be Road Rules 360, where we discuss Queensland's road rules, the legislation, the design for people walking, biking, in wheelchairs or on a scooter. It might be Not Everyone Drives, where we chat with people whose transport options don't include a car in a car-dependent society. And it might be People and Projects, where our conversations are with people working on a specific aspect of inclusive transportation. Today we're doing one of our People and Projects episodes. I am here in Caboolture, as usual, on the country of the Gubbi Gubbi people. And today we have this amazing person called Grant Ennis, who is far away in another place in Paris. I used to live in Paris many years ago. So I thought it'd be really cool to hear what Grant has to say, and also what is it like in Paris, because they've been having these huge changes recently.
Well, thanks for having me on the show, Wendy. It's really good to be here. And when I've been listening to the other podcasts that you've done, it's wonderful to hear about the kind of work going on in Australia and in your community and the kinds of things that you guys are doing. So really a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
So when I was living there, that was the mid-90s. I worked for a company called Microsoft, who I had never heard of when I started. So that shows you how times have changed. It was cars everywhere. Anne Hidalgo, who's the mayor, has changed it to be much more bicycle friendly, based on the 15-Minute City by Carlos Moreno. Is that right?
That's right. It's really been something incredible watching the streets of Paris change over the last couple of years. I don't know if you know this concept of the indicator species. You change the biodiversity, you change one thing, and then other things happen. I saw something incredible after a year here. I saw this creature called a child playing football on the street, and I was so pleased to see kids out to play in the middle of the street. It's something I had read about from hundreds of years ago, or that you'd see it in anywhere outside of what we call the West, essentially. But to see a street that I had personally been walking down a year later that was filled with cars, have kids playing on it, was really quite revolutionary. I think that was the biggest indicator of the success of what Carlos would probably call like an access or a proximity revolution in Paris, where they've taken places that were completely dedicated to cars and they've made it so that people can walk there, they can cycle there. Cars can also go there. The focus isn't on restricting what people can do, but providing more access. I was talking to somebody the other day in the UK, they call it the low traffic neighborhood. But I think what would be better framing and be less scary for a lot of people would be actually to call it a high access neighborhood. And that's really what you have in Paris. Most of the city can go downstairs within a 5 to 10, 15-minute walk, get everything they need for a day. Doctor, a pharmacist, a bakery, a vegetable shop. You can get everything that you need. And I really think that Paris is going to be hopefully setting a trend for what's possible in our cities in the years to come. And I hope that more and more places can really see that Paris is not an exception, but something that can be done anywhere.
And we're on the outskirts of Brisbane. And one of the things I was hearing Brent Tadarian, who is a very well-regarded urban planner, I guess, he's done a lot of international projects, and he says the sort of inner city areas like Paris compared to the outer suburbs are quite different. So have you been on the outskirts of Paris to see what it's like in the suburbs and even further out?
I'm no expert on French urban planning, but I've seen a lot of this kind of phenomena around the world where the outlying areas of cities are much less desirable to live in. They're less nice, they have different kinds of issues. Talking with my French colleagues and friends, I get a pretty consistent response as to what's going on in the suburbs. While you've got a quite dense housing, you've got apartment blocks, you don't have a kind of level of access there that would make it really conducive to good living. If you live in one of these suburbs, you're going to have to go downtown to Paris to work. You're going to have to go further out to find your vegetables, to find the things that you need. So the thing that we need to see more in what they call suburbs here in Paris is more shops, more places to go, what are often called third spaces, concert venues, cinemas, football football pitches, places where people can hang out, cafes, places where people can work, more schools, more things that would require them to go to the center of Paris less. That's what we really want to see. It's not that we want people to go to the center of Paris less, but we want people to not be dependent on a long commute to the city center every day.
Okay, so you work as a lecturer at Monash University, and what do you lecture in?
I'm the author of a book called Dark PR, which came out last year, and I also lecture at Monash University about the kinds of things I talk about in my book, Dark PR, about the way that existing government policies, existing government decisions have actually created the social problems that we're experiencing today.
And I read in your book that cars are subsidised, corporate welfare it's called, to something like $44 billion. That's in Australia alone. I wanted to throw something. I was so horrified when you put that. I'm really pleased that you have written this book. I know you because you kept publishing on LinkedIn about you'd written this book, and I kept seeing it and I'm going, do I want to read it? Is it some guy on, read my book. And I was going, look, I'll have a look. And I started to look further around what the book is and doing a little bit of a review here and there. And I saw you had these amazing people who'd written those little blurbs. I was just like, these are really stellar people. This is good stuff. So I got it and I read it, and it's in our local library. I was just really impressed by the level of scrutiny and analysis that you had done and how you had pulled all these things together, because I'm in my late 50s now, but I knew about, for instance, global warming in 1983, and I knew about cars being subsidized, and I knew about corporate welfare, and I kind of knew all this sort of stuff, and it sat on the edge. There was something I couldn't quite name that was making it difficult to see why there was no progress, given there were all these kind of great projects and great ideas and we're doing stuff. But what you showed in that book outlined some strategies, and my husband and I were looking at something yesterday, and I just thought, there it is. It's a project that makes it better in nature, and look, they sequester carbon, a fossil fuel company. I thought, there it is. That's the exact example. So if you're okay, just stepping through all of the 9 different strategies in regards to how we move around our towns and how we get to the places that we want and need to get to.
Sure. In my book, I talk about these 9 strategies, as you mentioned. They apply to almost any kind of societal issue. What I found was that the playbook being used by industry to steer our attention away from really addressing the root causes of our problems was the same for everything. I spent a lot of time figuring out what are really the main framing and rhetorical techniques that can really be said to be used across industry. And I was rather shocked how very similar they all are. So for looking at access, for looking at proximity, for making sure that our communities allow us to get the things that we need very easily and readily and encourage a healthy life, the first framing device I call is denialism. Many people know about climate change denialism, for example, but it's a technique that's been used by almost every industry, and it's unfortunately the place that most researchers stop. We say we've uncovered the denialism. Industry is trying to hide the evidence. We don't get further than that. It's really just the tip of the iceberg. So you'll often hear that the road lobby, the people that build our roads, and the automobile industry saying that high-speed roads are not dangerous, which is such a ridiculous thing to say. The human body, when hit by a fast-moving vehicle, is very clearly going to be injured at a higher rate than a human body hit by a slow-moving vehicle. It boggles the mind that we can continue to say, or anybody can continue to say, high speeds don't cause death or aren't harmful or can be made safe, you often hear. So this is kind of the first level of denialism.
We just recently had some works up on one of the streets nearby. And in the blurb that I got from the TMR, Transport and Main Roads, it said safer roads. And I'm going, and then it says more efficiency and higher speed. I emailed them and I said, these are contradictory terms. How can you have a higher speed and make it safer? That's exactly what you're saying. These stuff that you see on these sales blurbs for the roadworks.
That's exactly it. And that's actually what I would call post-denialism. You led right into the next frame, that not only are roads that are going to be killing us and our friends, family, and pets and animals and destroying our planet, not only are these roads not dangerous, which is denialism, but the road industry calls them improvements. And their argument is that if you make a road wider, and you compare that wider road to a narrow road, and you have both cars going 100 kilometers per hour down both of those roads. The car that has the wider road is less likely to die from hitting something, but crash. They're not wrong. And this is where we have a problem with human psychology, where we are forgetting about second order effects. And I don't mean that in some kind of fancy jargony way. I just mean there's a secondary effect. If you build wider roads, people naturally drive faster on them. People aren't wrong when you say that you build a wider road, a car is less likely to crash at a given speed. That's true. The car is also more likely to drive faster on that road. And because you've made it wider, you've increased what they call the crossing distance. So somebody walking, somebody on a skateboard, somebody on a bicycle is going to have to expose themselves to a much higher amount of risk as they're trying to get across that road, and will be more likely to be killed by that fast moving vehicle. Calling this road widening a quote unquote safety improvement is so dramatically dystopian. It's shocking, as you found.
I'm thinking about a street here called Morayfield Road. It is my most detested road, and our listener will have heard me rant about Morayfield Road many times on this show. They keep widening it, and it's very difficult for children to get to school, to walk to school safely, actually. And we had a school student who came on the show to tell us how difficult it was for her to be able to cross safely, and she has younger siblings to cross with her. That's a great example, and now I know what that is. So that's post-denialism. So that's the second one. So what's the third one?
The third one is I call normalization. So this is when you take something that's a serious problem and you just kind of say, it's inevitable, it's normal. What are you going to do? You diffuse attention to the problem by using terminology and framing and rhetoric. It just makes it seem like it's going to happen no matter what. What are you going to do? And the way that the road industry, the road lobby did that with car crashes, road crashes, is they reframed them accidents. I think in the 1920s, 1930s, you had a lot of different terms used to refer to road crashes. Motor killings, motor murder. You had all these kind of very dramatic terms. And Peter Norton described this best in his research and his books. For me to kind of summarize what he's found is that the road lobby, the automobile industry, the road builders collectively, they worked with journalists and they worked with news outlets and kind of said something to the effect of, when you find out there's a crash, let us know and we'll write you the press release for how you can talk about that. Those memos that were being written by or produced by the industry lobby didn't refer to crashes as crashes. They called them accidents, consistently called them accidents. This accidentification of a public health problem, of road death, has real and very powerful dilution effects on support for public policy to change things. So we know that when people are exposed to the word accident over time, they are less likely to think change is needed than if they were to be exposed to narratives like road crash, motor murder, other kinds of terms. When we can test that, the frames that I'm talking about today, we know that when you test them, you test people that are exposed to one message versus people that are exposed to another one. And then you look at how much would they support a policy such as narrowing lanes around schools to protect children. You would see less support for a policy like that when people are exposed to the word accident than when they're exposed to the word crash.
The UK's done some nice media work on this. Instead of saying they were hit by a car, they say the driver crashed into the person walking or the pedestrian, as opposed to it was just a car accident. Is that part of that same technique?
Unfortunately, I feel like that's a very well-intentioned effort. It falls into another framing trap that we'll talk about in a moment called safety individualism, and continues to put the blame on people. We can skip to that now, or we can talk about it in a moment.
Let's go to the fourth one. Let's step through them one by one.
Okay, so the fourth framing tactic used by industry, I call silver boomerangs. I think everyone's familiar with silver bullets, this idea of it'll solve all of our problems. We're just looking for a silver bullet. A silver boomerang is a kind of solution promoted by industry that comes back to bite us. So when you make automobile brakes better, for example, you make cars quote unquote safer, you make the technology for safety better, and you make it so that cars can stop faster and so that they don't hit a child. You make it so that more of the features of a car car are automated, you end up having people pay less attention and have a closer stopping distance. So the research on anti-lock brakes, for example, is really solid on this question. The better you make brake systems on cars, the closer people stop to the car in front of them. So in a given instance, when you have a child running in front of the car, the person with the better, quote unquote, better car is going to be more likely to hit that kid. It's really well documented. We've had research on this since the 1930s up until today. This is a rebound effect. We've made something, quote unquote, safer, but as a result, we behave more dangerously. That's not to say we don't want better brakes on cars. That's not to say we don't want, quote unquote, safer cars. It's just to say that when industry's promoting the rhetoric that we can stop this global public health emergency of road death that kills millions all the time, that we could solve it by more and better technology, they're really doing a great effort to deceive us. That's not the solution. We can't drive more and more every year and expect to see less road death. It just doesn't work.
I very seldom drive now because I don't have a car. Usually somebody else is driving me somewhere. And my friend has a Tesla and it's got all the bells and whistles, and he came and visited me, so he had a hire car. And he just didn't notice, he didn't pay attention. And he was like, oh, it didn't even occur to me that there would be someone there because my other car always tells me, alarms me and alerts me.
Wow.
But I was really freaked out. He's a very vigilant person. He used to work in the emergency department in hospitals. So he's very aware of what's going on everywhere. I was really shocked at how lax he was about his own awareness. And the other one is today I was with one of our volunteers. He's a really beautiful man, very, very gentle soul. And I kept wondering why he's waiting to not put on the brakes, because I keep going, put the brakes on, put the brakes on, because he's going really close and he's looking at me while he's talking. I'm like, look at the road, don't look at me. People are sort of lulled into a false sense of security. Is this what you're saying?
Exactly. The better you make a piece of equipment, the more dangerously a human being is going to use that equipment. That's how it works. There's a guy in the UK that refers to it as safety benefits are usually absorbed by human beings as performance benefits.
Okay.
That's a very good way of putting it. You get a safer car, you don't drive more safely. There's a tendency to drive it more in a fun way, an enjoyable way, which is more dangerous, in fact.
So that's silver boomerang. So number 5, what's that one?
The fifth one is what I call magic framing. You promote a solution that has no evidence, but kind of sounds wishy-washy, but possible in a magical thinking kind of sense. For road death and for the things that we are discussing here and for your audience, the framing device there is the autonomous car. So we've been told since the early 1940s that the autonomous car is just around the corner and will solve all of our safety problems. No, we still don't have an autonomous car solving all of our safety problems. We don't really have any evidence to suggest that if we did have this autonomous car, that it would solve our safety problems. We just have a lot of industry propaganda making that narrative. This enables more automobility. It enables us to continue to expand road networks that are only usable for cars. It allows us to perpetuate the car harm around us. It doesn't actually ever deliver anything. It's magical thinking.
All right, number 6, what would that be?
Number 6, I call the treatment frame. So rather than prevent a given problem from occurring, you treat the subsequent result of that problem. In the case of road death, it's the idea pushed by industry that we don't need to reduce vehicle kilometers traveled, vehicle miles traveled per year per person. We don't need to increase the mode share of walking and cycling in order to reduce road deaths. All we need is more ambulances. We just need to make it so that after a crash occurs, we get to people faster. We can have drones and helicopters picking up the person out of the car, taking directly to world-class emergency medical care. General Motors gives out an award every year, as I understand it, for the top road crash trauma surgeon. You have all of these automobile companies are always giving out free ambulances around the world. This idea that we can just treat the problem after it's already occurred is really a key element of industry lobbying and industry rhetoric. Here in Paris, you have an emergency ward at what they call the American Hospital, which was on a big plaque on the wall, financed by Peugeot Motor Car. It's fantastic to see this. It's just crazy that you have these industries that are lobbying to widen our roads that are then, on the other hand, giving money to emergency care facilities.
Let's go on to number 7.
So number 7 is what we call victim blaming or individualism framing. I'm less less and less am I calling it victim blaming. And I think more and more, I think I should retitle that chapter of the book Individualism, because what industry does is they make large scale material changes to our environment about individual people's willpower within that environment. So industry, for example, in Australia, has lobbied for laws that require what they call setbacks. By law, a house in Australia can only be so far from the road. A house is going to need to be a certain distance between itself and the house next to it. It's going to have a certain amount of space behind the house, and there's going to have to be a lane in front of the house on the road where cars can park. There's going to be the law that says you have to have a garage where you can keep a car inside. You have a law that says you have to have space to park cars in front of the house, but still on the property. These laws are making it so our houses are so spread apart by default, mandatorily, that you have to drive, because when you have all of these houses so spaced out, you induce distances between homes and spaces where people need to get to that are impossible to use any other form of transit. You also have laws that make it illegal to build a coffee shop, to build a bookstore. I strongly doubt, Wendy, that you could take your garage in your house and turn it into a coffee shop if you wanted to. I think that there's probably a law against that in Australia. I think you couldn't open up a pub. I think you couldn't sell vegetables without a permit. All of these laws are things that have been lobbied for by industry. So they've created an environment where we are dependent on cars. You have researchers, Graham Curry, he calls it forced car ownership. We are forced into this kind of transport poverty by zoning and land use regulations that make it so that we have to drive. And in an environment where you have to drive, you have what they call vehicle kilometers traveled or vehicle miles traveled goes up. The percentage of trips per day that on foot goes down. The percentage of trips per day on bicycle goes down. All of this is the result of industry lobbying politicians to enact laws that change the built environment around us and make it so that we're forced to drive more, own more cars, use more petrol, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Within this space, industry tries to blame us for the harms of automobility. And that includes blaming the people that kill other people. So in a context where you have to drive, we know there will be a certain amount of death. We just know it. We know for every vehicle kilometer traveled, there will be a certain amount of death. Some places have that lower, some places have it higher. But for every extra vehicle kilometer traveled or vehicle mile traveled, you will have more death. To say that we need to blame the driver more, we need to be blaming the pedestrian more, we need to be blaming the bicyclist more, motorbike driver, whatever, you're still keeping the entire focus on the individual. And this is referred to as safety individualism. It's a frame that's been used since the dawn of the automobile. One of the earliest ways and permutations of this framing was the quote unquote nut behind the wheel, with this idea that it's the idiot that's driving that's to blame, not the car dependency. You have a lot of industry-backed entities in Australia who push for these kinds of solutions. They push for pledges. I promise I won't text and drive. Sign this petition. You have people saying that we need to train people better to drive better signage, don't text and drive, or a mass media campaign, don't text and drive. These interventions, these policies that are backed by industry or sometimes just pumped out by industry themselves, have been so thoroughly tested and evaluated and researched. And every time we've looked at do crashes actually go down, we find no reduction in death. You've got meta-analysis, systematic reviews. These are what they call studies of studies. So you take 200 studies of whether or not these kinds of things work, and then you say, okay, collectively, what do all these studies say? And they consistently come back with, we don't see a reduction in death. This is the primary solution being promoted by the road lobby. Road death and the problems of our communities are the result of people voluntarily making bad decisions. If only we could educate them more, they would make better decisions and we wouldn't have this problem. Despite the fact that we've designed a dangerous living environment for everybody, people just voluntarily need to use that environment better. It's like putting 1,000 guns in a room with 10-year-olds and then saying the way to prevent those 10-year-olds from shooting each other is just train those children not to do so.
Yeah, it's nuts. It drives me mad. I was actually at an Australasian College of Road Safety workshop yesterday. It was about safe systems, so it's a particular approach about how do we get all these different types of transport so that it is actually much safer for people. And the big question is, we know what to do. We know how to make our spaces much better, but how do we get the political will? I think is one of the really key questions that you're really pulling out of here is once you see through the smoke and mirrors, then you can go, no, that's actually rubbish. Let's not do that. So we've done that. Safety, individualism, which used to be called victim blaming. Number 8, what's that one?
Number 8, it kind of goes off of what you were just saying. A lot of people will say, okay, I get it, that safety individual isn't the best solution, but what we need is really complex solutions. The situation is very confusing and difficult to understand, so we're going to need to look for some kind of systematic, complex, circular solution. That rhetoric, when you plug it into policymaking processes, goes nowhere. Complexity, systems thinking, circular thinking are all narratives that are boosted by industry. Systems thinking and the terminology of systems is not so bad, but there's an element of it that is. In terms of framing experts, we're increasingly trying to stop using systems and shift towards structures or material environment. When you do polling on how people perceive systems, people can think of them as nebulous, unclear, no real well, how do you act? How do you solve a systematic problem? What does that mean? And it's the same with circular or complex. These are terms that lead us nowhere. If somebody says hey, Wendy, how can I start a fire to do a barbecue? And you say, well, it's very complex. You need a systematic solution for that.
Yeah.
You're giving people the most useless advice. How do you make an omelet? Well, you need a systematic approach. No, and it's actually, you need to just follow the instructions. You crack some eggs, you need some heat, You have a procedure. This kind of framing of complexity, circular systems, web approach, they don't take us anywhere useful. You constantly see it in industry rhetoric.
So this is great because I go to all these webinars and I'm learning and I'm trying to figure out how it all works. This is really good. So the 9th one is
multifactorial. So this is where we say, you really, all these things, some of them don't work so well, but we need to mix everything together. And if we mix everything together and use a combined, basketed approach, then we'll be able to solve anything. That no one solution can work on its own, that no one solution works in isolation. We need a multifactorial solution. And this was something that was first really promoted by the tobacco industry and has kind of taken off since, to the point that everybody thinks every solution needs to be in combination. It's fascinating. People see it as axiomatic. You'll be in conversation and people will say, oh, it doesn't work, or this thing doesn't work. And then somebody will just say, oh yeah, well, no one solution will work on its own. No, that's not true. If we were to reduce the amount that we build roads that we widen, we'll have less road deaths. If we make it so that people can walk to the things that they need, they will walk to the things that they need. You don't need a combined approach. We need to stop expanding automobile-centric infrastructure. Wales did this really wonderful thing. Wales in the UK, they've made a policy change where they have said, we are not going to build any more new roads. We're not going to widen any more roads. That's fantastic. We need to be seeing more of that. We need to see a lot more of that. We need to be improving access. Where people already live, we need to be providing the kinds of things that they need nearer to them. And we need to stop expanding road infrastructure. And it's not that we need some kind of combined approach of many different things that don't work. You combine the Force from Star Wars with the magic of Lord of the Rings, you're not going to get any kind of solution just because you've mixed two nonsensical ideas together.
That was very interesting because somebody said this doesn't change the fact that we need to lower the speed to 30 kilometers an hour on our suburban streets. And I thought, yeah, that's exactly right. Okay, so say we've got people from our Department of Transport and they have a magic wand. They have now read your playbook of malign intention by the road lobby. What would you say they can do? So they're sitting in their office. What would you say is something they can do, they need to get on with, that is going to be digestible further up the food chain?
I think that the people that are in these kinds of engineering roles are often very trapped. They don't have a whole lot of flexibility for what they can do. That's what they would probably themselves say. And despite a lot of people kind of saying they do have some wiggle room, they can build things safer. And in some context, that is true. I think for the most part, these guys really are trapped. And the solution isn't for the people working in the Department or Ministry of Transport to make better decisions. I think in that sense, we're continuing to do safety individualism. We need need to be changing the policy documents that those people have to follow. You saw in the United States really groundbreaking reform last year where the policy documents that shape how roads are built in the United States was changed. It's not perfect. It's not 100% better, but it's quite a lot better. They're no longer following what's called the 85th percentile rule in the United States by default. Engineers now have the flexibility to not use it. It would be better if it was just banned, but at least it's no longer mandatory.
So the 85th centile, would you mind just explaining that for our listener?
So the 85th percentile rule is if you imagine that you've built a road and the road is designed for somebody to go 30 kilometers per hour on it. With the 85th percentile rule being the law, that means that traffic engineers will look at the road and look at how fast people are going on that road. So like 85% of the people are going less than 30 kilometers per hour, but you've got another 15% that are going 35 or 40, let's say. And this rule was created by the automobile industry in the United States, as I understand it. And it's got no scientific backing. To the contrary, it's a rule we know. It's kind of like rust on our cities. It's making it so that we're continuing to destroy our cities over time, one small bit at a time. You could always keep the blame on the traffic engineer, and a really great book is coming out this year. I haven't read it yet, but I'm excited to. I think it's called Killed by a Traffic Engineer. There are a lot of things where traffic engineers do have some wiggle room, but by and large, they do have to follow these guidelines. So we need to be changing those guidelines. Even more importantly, we need to stop the subsidies to the energy, road, and automobile sectors. It's just ridiculous. For you who don't drive, why are your taxes going to reduce the cost of the people who are driving? You are subsidizing drivers. The pedestrians of our countries are subsidizing the people that are killing our children to drive more. We're actively incentivizing people to drive more. We're actively incentivizing road death. We're actively incentivizing a very unhealthy living environment. And that's what we need to change. It's called subtractive versus additive thinking. It's difficult. Humans are biased against subtractive thinking. We always want to add something else. We want to add the autonomous car. We want to add some safety gizmos to a car. We want to add a new innovative policy. We find it difficult as human beings to think, what are the existing rules and regulations that are creating the problematic environment around us, and how do we dismantle them? That is really where I think we need to be moving forward, to dismantle the things that are creating the problems that we have around us.
So I'd like to give something for our listener to do, maybe they can implement themselves. What would you recommend?
I would recommend that people get involved with their neighbors, with their friends, with you, Wendy, and find ways to come together, discuss these problems, and find ways to pressure our political systems, our political structures, to make the changes that you and I have discussed today. There's a lot of international resources that people can draw from. One great resource is the Parking Reform Network. It's looking at the amount of subsidized parking that we provide in our cities and looking at ways that we can fight that and really change the places around us. I would recommend that people, in addition to organizing together, also expand their vision for what is possible. There's a huge bias towards thinking that the built environment around us can never be changed. People just really have a hard time thinking that what is around them can look differently. The more you can open your mind and understand that we can have anything we want, the community, the design of the buildings around us, the way we use the land can completely change. It's possible, and it's been done time and time again. All advancements of human society have been the result of people coming together with a shared vision and really fighting for it, demanding that our politics change. That's what I would like to see people doing more. Really opening their vision up, believing in what's really possible, and organizing and fighting for it, demanding that change.
Fantastic. I love that. I like the idea of really rethinking the way that we could have our urban landscape, because when I was there in Paris in the mid-90s, cars parked on sidewalks, it was cars just everywhere. And now look at what Anne Hidalgo has done. Absolutely revolutionized it. It is possible. Absolutely, it's possible. Jeanette Sadiq Khan in New York. Absolutely possible. She's done amazing stuff too.
I don't dispute anything you're saying, but I would like to add that I think even Anne Hidalgo and Jeanette Sadiq Khan would really say to you, Wendy, they couldn't have done it without you and the people like you, Wendy, and the people that you're organizing with, because they are endorsing your agenda and then running with it. The platform that Anne Hidalgo is fighting for is one that civil society presented to her. It's one that she is endorsing and running with. But it's not that she's operating in isolation. She is advancing a narrative and a policy platform that only exists as the result of advocacy organizations like yours. Only exists because people come together and say, we need to see change. There's a problem here, and really fighting for it, appealing to people like Anne Hidalgo. I do worry that we put a lot of focus on these kinds of heroes and we wait for the hero, but the hero is us. The hero is us organizing, and it's you, Wendy, and your colleagues and the people that you're working with that are really going to be presenting these kinds of policy proposals and demanding it of the future Anne Hidalgos of Brisbane and Queensland, that we're really going to allow us to see the change we want to see.
Yay! Unless there's anything else you want to add, I thought that was a great end. I have so enjoyed today's conversation. I feel like the wool has been pulled off my eyes. Even though I read your book, there were bits that I didn't quite understand, but putting it right there about road deaths absolutely nailed it for me. So I have really appreciated this conversation, and I appreciate you because it's very early in the morning over there in Paris. And I hope you have enjoyed the conversation too.
It was a delight. Thank you very much, Wendy.
It's my pleasure. Thanks a lot. All right, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for enjoying Streets and People presented by Get Around Cabo Car Free. We publish our podcast regularly at the usual places and on our website where you can find out more about us. getaroundcabocarfree.com.au. That's www.getaround, get around, that's pretty straightforward. Cabo, C-A-B-O, that's short for Caboolture. Car Free, C-A-R-F-R-E-E. There's no hyphen in that. .com.au. Our theme music is The Thief on AM Sound, which is just like our cars on our streets, always stealing the space. So let's stop that thief.